Is Ron Logan the real Delphi killer? That's the question I was asked when people heard him make this questionable statement.
If they'd have waited a few more days, or another month or whatever before they got themselves killed, nothing would have happened to them.
Welcome to Never a Truer Word, where we look at the words that people choose to use to see if they're telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Looking at what is said using my statement investigation process, something anyone can learn to give themselves an advantage in understanding the people all around them based on what they say. Because what I do here is strip away everything apart from the words that are said, because those words are going to be key to seeing possible deception, possible truth, and also possibly the motivations behind a person. Now, Richard Allen is serving 130 years for killing Liberty German and Abigail Williams in Delphi, Indiana. However, there is a question mark over this guy, Ron Logan, because he owned the property where the girls' bodies were found and supposedly confessed to the crime to an inmate in prison. Now, Ron Logan has talked a lot, or at least he did before he died in January 2022. So let's look at what he said and ask, do his words point to him being the real killer, being a guilty person? Has there been a huge miscarriage of justice or not? Now, as I'm looking at Ron as a suspect in a crime, what I'm looking for in his words are storytelling elements. So is he trying to give us a story rather than real life? Persuade us that things happened, give us reasons why things happened. I'll be looking for that. Is he hiding events in his word? In other words, we generally prefer to be truthful. So what we do is that we hide things. So we tell the truth and then just hide the bad stuff rather than concoct lots of lies, which are very complex to tell. And I'll also be looking for elements of stress like stutters and stammers in his words, because guilty people, when they're trying to talk and pretend they're innocent, it's very, very stressful, and that will come out in the way they talk. So let's delve into the words. Let's start off with that interview, which was him in prison talking to Court TV, which got everyone asking, this is all very odd. Let's have a listen.
I don't actually believe that anything, all this that happened to me was my fault. But in fact, I only had 4 weeks to go on my probation, and it was a non-issue thing. In other words, I was done. If they'd have waited a few more days, or another month or whatever before they got themselves killed, nothing would have happened to them.
Now, what Ron is talking about there is the fact that actually, as a result of the Delphi information, it was found, the investigation, it was found that he had broken his probation rules by driving when he gave his alibi for where he was that day. So he ended up back in jail. So that's what he's talking about there. And he says, my son actually believed that, that anything, all this had happened to me was my fault. But in fact, I only had 4 weeks to do on my probation. It was a non-issue thing. So what I'm seeing there in that first part is a guy taking no responsibility for his actions, because this all happened to him. It didn't happen to him. Ron made it happen. He was the one breaking the probation rules, but he's taking no responsibility and he's being very passive about it. And it's not, I got caught or anything like that. It's, all this happened to me. And he's even saying it was a non-issue thing. People do not go to jail for non-issue things, Ron. It was an issue thing. You broke your probation, but you're pushing back very much on that, taking no responsibility for your actions at all. This is the part that really got people going, what's going on here? Because he then said, in other words, I was done. If they had waited a few more days, or another month or whatever before they got themselves killed, nothing would have happened to me. Now, that very last phrase, nothing would have happened to me, again, is this passiveness going on here, where he's not to blame for what happened to him and the fact he's back in prison. Well, he is. He's taken zero responsibility for that. But let's look at the thing that got people contacting me and going, what is going on here? And this is the sense in these words that the victims, these two young girls, were responsible for what happened to them, because they could have waited. They could have waited to get killed a month later. I mean, what is the guy saying there? It's absolutely horrible. And they got themselves killed. No, someone killed them. But he's putting all the blame there on the victims. So does this point to his guilt? Well, he is certainly victim blaming there. But for what? What is he blaming the victims for? Is he blaming the victims because he doesn't want to take responsibility again for what happened? Or is he blaming the victims because if they hadn't put themselves where they got killed, then he would not be back in prison? It's their fault for getting killed. It's their fault for being out in a dangerous place or whatever it is. Hard to say at this time, but we can look at some more from Ron and see if we can get anything from his words. Now, this is classic investigation stuff because he was interviewed, because the girls were found in his land, he was interviewed during the hunt for the killer very shortly after all this happened on TV. So let's have a look at some of his interviews and dig into the words that he uses there. Is he sounding guilty? Are his words implying any guilt? Or is he actually an innocent person in all of this? Let's have a listen to some of that.
Who would have thought they'd let their children out to do something special that day, take a trip down, and it turn out a disaster like this?
For 53 years, Logan's lived on the country road near the trail that leads to the Monon High Bridge.
People walk up and down with their children, and yeah, it's quite a nice little trail, and the bridge is real.
Never, though, has Logan seen anything like what he has this week. The search for an eventual discovery of the bodies of Libby German and Abby Williams.
The area that they were in is very hard to get to. I mean, you can't get there unless you walk there. I mean, so somebody would be walking with them or something.
So what do I get in that? Well, the first answer he gave there is, who would have thought that they'd let their children out to do something special that day, take a trip down, and it turned out a disaster like this? Now, I've got an interesting concept there from him in that he thinks that someone let their children out to do something special. That implies real control over the children, that the children shouldn't really be out. And actually, 14-year-old girls, do we let 14-year-old girls out, or do the 14-year-old girls go out of their own accord because they're making their way in the world? But his concept there is these children were let out. Is that he was a very strict parent, he's got very strict views, or does he know the families or so on? But why did he use that phrase, let their children out? And I'm pulled to the word children there because he talks about children quite a lot as he's talking about this. And why is that? Is he just aware that these were very young girls that were killed and he considers them children, or does he have some other interest in children going on? He says the day turned into a disaster like this. Now, what does disaster mean? It's a tragedy. It's a horrible thing. It's a gruesome thing that happened. And he's used the word disaster to talk about it, which is fine because, well, it's not fine, but what it is he's certainly not turning down the severity of what happened here. He's saying it is a disaster. But again, is this self-serving Ron? It happened on his property. People are looking at him or looking at him suspiciously, or the police, to give his alibi for why he wasn't there at the time, he's going to have to say, I was driving and I'm not allowed to drive. So is this a personal disaster for him? I get the sense already from what I've looked at that he could be quite self-centered, and also things happen to him. He's one of life's victims. He doesn't make things happen in his head. Things happen to him all the time. It's not about his choices, it's about other people's choices, why he suffers. Is that why he uses the word disaster? Next, he says, people walk up and down with their children. And yeah, it's quite a nice little trail, and the bridge is real, and it sort of drifts off there. It's a strange edit there. But I've got a couple of things that he mentions again. So he mentions children again. And he says, people walk up and down with their children. And walk will become something that he mentions a lot as well in connection with what happened to the girls. He's fixated on walking, as we'll see, and this is the first mention that we see in all of this about him talking about walking. And also, I don't know what this trail is like, I've never been there, but people walk up and down, I'm guessing without children as well. I'm also guessing that certainly the girls there were not walking with any adults, so they were walking apart. But people walk up and down with their children. Is this notion that the children were walking with someone that he's talking about here? And again, why I mention that will become apparent later, but people walk up and down with their children. And then the next thing that he said at the end of that news thing was the area that they're in is very hard to get to. I mean, you can't get there unless you walk there. I mean, so somebody had to be walking with them or something. So we have this accompanied walking thought again. He said about the trail that people walk up and down there with their children. Now, I'm sure that does happen, but that's not the only people that use a trail. So why was he focused in on that? Potentially just because children were the victim of this crime. But here, when he talks about the area that the girls were found in, he says somebody had to be walking with them or something. So he thinks that however the girls got there, walking was involved, and walking with that person was involved as well. He also says it's very hard to get to, which shows knowledge that he has got there before. Now, it was on his land, so there's nothing suspicious about that, but it is in his words that he has some thoughts around how hard it would be to get down there. So that's the first news clip we're going to look at. Let's have a look at another one and listen to this.
I can't really wrap my emotions around it. It's so mind-boggling. I haven't really caught up. It hasn't caught up with me yet.
Up and down the hills, across that bank now circled with crime tape, his son grew up playing here.
Never in your wildest dreams do you think that he comes down here to play, he won't come back home.
So what we have from him there is more of some of the same. I really can't wrap my emotions around it, though, is what he says first. I know that's a strange one, that's showing that he's got an emotional response to what has happened. That's entirely natural, an emotional response around it, that maybe he's not thinking so much about the whys and wherefores and the logistics of it all, but he cannot wrap his emotions around what has happened. But he does refer to the crime, the killing of two young girls as it. I can't really wrap my emotions around it. So he's sort of putting some distance and lack of severity in there compared to what happened. Again, he says it's so mind-boggling. Now he's talking about the logistics of it all. Mind-boggling is talking about that. I haven't really caught up. It hasn't caught up with me yet. So he starts off by talking about himself. I haven't really caught up. That's in the present tense. So he's saying at that moment in time, he hasn't caught up. And then he goes on to say, it hasn't caught up with me yet. So there's some confusion going on there, which potentially reflected in his words. He can't wrap his emotions around it, which is very interesting because the normal phrase is, I can't wrap my head around it, but he can't wrap his emotions around it. And it's so mind-boggling. I might pick on that word so and say that's a little bit persuasive, but it's quite straightforward there. Although he says, I can't really wrap my emotions around it. Maybe he can wrap his emotions around it. He just can't really. It's so mind-boggling. Is he being a little bit persuasive there in his words? But it hasn't caught up with me yet. And then when he goes on to talk about his son, he says, never in your wildest dreams do you think that he comes down here to play and he won't come back home. What we have here is him talking about you and not himself. He didn't say, never in my wildest dreams did I think my son would come down here to play and he never comes back home. He's socializing it here, or creating a little bit of distance by saying what you would do. Never in your wildest dreams do you think that he comes down here to play. He won't come back home. Now, we have here to play, and children is a theme of what he's talking about, potentially because children are the victims of this crime. But children are a theme of what he talks about, and that to play, children play. So he's thinking about his son as a child here at the very least, because that seems to be what he's talking about. It's not a grown-up son. He's not thinking about his son maybe being a teenager or so on and going down there to do whatever teenagers do. But he's talking about his son as a young person. And again, we have a slight, he won't come back home is downplaying again. It's not he will get brutally killed, but he won't come back home does have some solidity to it in the fact that he's talking about the repercussions of the crime there. Here's some more from Ron talking to a TV interview at the time of the investigation.
You just cannot believe this terrible thing that happened to the community and the families actually happened here on my property in my backyard.
He told me he has an alibi, buying tropical fish 20 miles away.
I was not home during the time that all this was happening. I was in Lafayette. Yeah. And I didn't get home till approximately 6:30 in the evening, and then the neighbor stopped to ask for permission to look back here for the girls.
What we have in this is him talking once more about you. You cannot believe this terrible thing that happened to the community and the families actually happened here on my property in my backyard. I can believe it, but then I know that's what happened. But he doesn't say about him. He doesn't say he cannot believe this terrible thing that happened to the community and the families actually happened here on my property, in my backyard. However, this one goes a couple of ways for me, because he does talk about a terrible thing. He doesn't talk about a murder, so terrible thing is downplaying it slightly, but it is a terrible thing. And he talks about the consequences there. He talks about the consequences to the community and the families. So he does talk about, and he's aware of the consequences. He's not trying to hide some of that away from us. Interesting order, though. He mentions community first, families second. We tend to mention the most important thing first when we list something, and the second most important thing to us will be second, and so on. So he feels this for the community first and the family second. So maybe a bit of distance between him and the families. Maybe by community, he puts himself in community and he feels he is a bit of a victim of what has happened here. And he talks about what actually happened here again. That's a little bit of downplaying there as well. And then he says, I was not home during the time that all this was happening. I was in Lafayette. And I didn't get home until approximately 6:30 in the evening, and then the neighbour stopped to ask for permission to look back here for the girls. Now, listen, this is one of the most key things that he's going to say. This is his alibi. This is him saying where he was at the time. And I've got to tell you, it's really straightforward. I'm not picking up very, very much in there at all. There's one stutter, but we all stutter at times. I've probably stuttered many times during this episode already, and I'm not guilty of things. But it's very straightforward. I was not home. There's nothing in there that doesn't need to be in there. There's no persuasive words or storytelling or, nothing that's like, I woke up early in the morning and decided I needed to buy tropical fish. So I told someone I was going to buy tropical fish and then got in my car and drove to Lafayette. None of that whatsoever. It's very straightforward, which is generally a hallmark of the truth. I was not home. And he also says, I was in Lafayette. Again, that's really straightforward. It's really direct. There are no needless words in there. No elements of storytelling there. I was not home. I was in Lafayette. So I would say in that him giving his alibi, I detect no deceptive language. It's very, very crisp. It's very, very clear. No storytelling, no stress, no hiding of anything detected in his words there at all. The only thing, again, was just the time all this was happening. So we've got, again, a downplaying of that. But, you're giving an interview to the news, maybe you do want to downplay that. But look, so far from him, I've got he seems to be interested in walking and accompanied walking between children and I'm guessing adults that are walking there. Got a little focus on children, but children were the sort of centre of this crime, obviously. But that part there where I was not at home, I was in Lafayette, I find that very, very believable. Coming up, Ron talks about deviance and his knowledge of where the bodies were found. But listen, do you ever feel you're not being told the full story? Well, look, you're right. This happening to us all the time, and I'm here to give you the key to seeing deeper, because this is about hearing the world with new ears, and I'm on a mission to share this with as many people as possible. So if you want to unlock the secret, then subscribe to this channel, follow what we do, join the movement, and also delve into the archives. There's a couple of episodes on Richard Allen that if you're enjoying this episode, I might like to look at those ones. There is a treasure trove of cases, though, waiting to be explored, looking at how deceptive and honest people use their words. So do you know someone who needs this, someone who deserves to hear the truth? Then hit the like button, share this, recommend it, pass it on, because every single click, every single share, it fuels the fire. It allows me to dig deeper, analyse further, and bring this life-changing skill to even more people. I regularly hear from grateful audience members who've navigated tricky life situations using the listening skills they've learned on this channel. So your like, your share, your recommendation could help someone like that, and it's a great gift to give. Let's go on with Ron Logan now, and this is a covert recording made of him on his land and is very interesting to listen to. Let's have a listen and break this down.
What do you think they screwed up?
Their investigation
What'd they do?
concentrated on people who didn't do anything too much.
That's what you think?
I know it's what happened. They were going to pin it on me.
Well, you weren't home
didn't find that. They didn't care. You don't understand. They didn't. Nobody knew that until later. They didn't care. We need to solve this, and you're it.
And you were in the hot seat.
I was in the hot seat. And when they found out there was just too much against them, and none of it, they gave up. But they spent all that time pissing around on a drive without a driver's license and all that shit when they should have been looking for murder.
Right. Yeah, you just had...
They wasted all that money, millions of dollars.
So there's the covert recording. I hope you can make out what it says, but if not, let's go through it word by word. He is asked, what do you think they screwed up? And he says, their investigation. What did they do? They concentrated on people who didn't do anything too much. Now, I like some of this from Ron. What do you think they screwed up? He says, their investigation. So he's not talking about screwing up and picking on him. That's not the first thing he says. They screwed up by looking at me. No, they screwed up their investigation. He's then asked, what did they do? And he said, concentrated on people who didn't do anything too much. What do we have here then in that? Lots. He mentions people. He doesn't mention himself, but I think he is talking about himself there, but also other people. Does he have knowledge that they went after wrong people? Or is he trying to say how great the mistake was when really he feels the mistake was they concentrated on him? And he says, who didn't do anything too much, which is not people who didn't do anything. It's people who did something. It just be not something he categorizes as too much. Well, what's going on there? Well, we've seen this already from him. It was a nothing. I was driving. That was all. It was a big nothing. I've had 4 weeks to go on my probation. I think that's what he's talking about there. I think he's talking about himself and saying they focused on me and I hadn't done anything too much. So I think he's a bit bitter about all of that. It's said to him by the covert recorder, that's what you think. And he says, I know it's what happened. They were going to pin it on me. Here we go. I know it's what happened. So it's a very definite word there. No, it's not, I think that's what's happened, or yeah, that's what happened. It's, I know it's what happened. We don't know what they've spent is going to lead to. They were going to pin it on me, which is a phrase that could go both ways, I guess, because I could imagine him saying if he was guilty, they accused me of doing it and I didn't. So that was very clean and straight compared to that sort of thing. He's very factual about they were going to pin it on me. But then the recorder says, but you weren't home that day. And he says, they didn't find that. They didn't care. You don't understand. Now, what was he going to say there? Because he starts saying, you didn't find that. They didn't find that what? I think it's they didn't find that out. Perhaps he was not kind of forthcoming with his alibi at first because he realised his alibi meant he'd been driving. I wonder if that's what happened with the guy. But I do wonder why they didn't find that out at first. And then he says they didn't care. So even when it was made clear to him that he wasn't home that day, he says they didn't care. Now, care is an interesting word there because it's not they didn't believe me, it's that they didn't care. Care is a good word normally, and I like the use of care there because it's very direct, it's very straightforward. There's not storytelling or persuasive, manipulative language going on here. He says, you don't understand. They didn't. Nobody knew that until later. So here we have confirmation, I think, that he wasn't there, but didn't tell them that he wasn't there, that he tried to say something else. Nobody knew that until later. They didn't care. We need to solve this and you're it. So he does feel there that the police were trying to pin it on him, and he explains it very well. Now, look, that's not proof that the police were trying to fit him up. That's not proof the police didn't have the right guy in their sights, but he's talking about it in a very straightforward way. But you'll notice that, again, his focus is not on his innocence. His focus is on the police action. So he's not trying to say, look how innocent I am. It's the woman talking that talks about his alibi and so on. It's not him that brings it up in this huge effort to persuade us that he must be innocent. He's kind of taking his innocence for granted as he's talking there. He's not trying to storytell or manipulate his way into it, but his focus is on the police action that came his way. She says to him, and you were in the hot seat. And he says, I was in the hot seat. And when they found out there was just too much against them, then there's something unclear. They gave a they spent all that time pissing around in without a driver's license and all that shit when they should have been looking for a murderer. Now, this is something else that makes me go, Ron Logan, I think, is being very honest. It's a data point that points to him telling the truth here, because he talks about them having too much against them. Interesting. It's not like he feels like he really made his innocence point. It's just that it kept building up and building up until they had too much against them, in his words. And then he talks about them pissing around on without a driver's license and all that shit. So we've got a common theme there, a consistency from Ron Logan, which is that he thinks this was a very minor thing, and that's the priority for him. Is I was done for a very minor thing. It's not I was nearly framed for a murder that I didn't do. It's that, and again, he's not taking responsibility for it, because you shouldn't drive without a driver's license. It's just a fact, and he seems to think that's a small thing and so on, and he's got a real grievance about that. But the thing I really like about that is at the end he says they should have been looking for a murderer. Now, so often when I am looking at guilty people pretending to be innocent, then they spend so much time trying to persuade us of their innocence, when all of us, real people, are wanting the murderer caught. We kind of don't care who it is. We want the guilty person caught. We want that scary person off the streets who can't harm any more children, or we want someone to face justice for what they did. And very often, guilty people pretending to be innocent forget that part of the whole equation, and what they do is just focus on proving their innocence. Well, we haven't seen very much proving of the innocence from Ron Logan, and now he's cognizant of the fact that all the time the police were looking at him, the real murderer was going about uncaught, free to do it again if they wanted to. Now, that's something else that reassures me that Ron Logan, another data point that this guy is telling the truth. And then he's put to him, right, yeah, he says they wasted all that money, millions of dollars. So again, he's really peed off with the police and all their actions. But there are some things that he said there. Bear in mind, I don't think he knows he's being recorded at this point. There are things in there that reassure me, data points there, that he is telling the truth. Let's have some more from that covert recording.
It's a shame what happened.
I'm not surprised. I thought this would happen.
What?
Not the murder, but when they put those trails in the middle of nowhere, I said, you're going to have all kinds of drug problems and all kinds of crap from this. This will draw every deviant in the world to it.
I mean, we walked it a little bit. I was a little scared, because it was just us two.
Whoever did it long gone, they're not going to do it again. Not here, anyway.
Do you think they're from here?
I was part of some kind of family for a long time.
Did you really? Really? Why did you think that?
Because it's too damn close. You can't see the forest from the trees.
Right.
Looking right at them, but can't. The person who done that could have been on the search team to look for him when they were missing.
Right.
I mean, they had people out here in my woods that night that they were looking for all over that place. They couldn't find them. Now, why did you not find them then?
Yeah, I find that surprising too.
And if that is a crime, with hundreds of people in my woods and walking up down the creek, tromping all over everything, what are you going to find?
So after some reassuring things in the first excerpt from the covert call, I've got some questions about some things that are here. It's put to him, it's a shame what happened. And Ron says, I'm not surprised. I thought this would happen. What? He's asked. He says, not the murder, but when they put those trails in the middle of nowhere, I said, you're going to have all kind of drug problems and all kinds of crap from this. So what I have here is him talking about a murder again, not downplaying what happened there. He's very open and talks about the big thing that happened. He's not trying to hide that or minimize that too much. But then he shows a little bit about his thought process there. Because when trails were put in, he thought, you're going to have all kind of drug problems and all kinds of crap from this. So he didn't think that's something nice to go walking in nature, or that's going to help the health of the community, or, haven't they turned this land into something beautiful? His first thought, as he says it there, was there's going to be drug problems and all kinds of crap from this. And then he says this will draw every deviant in the world to it. Just ask yourself this question. Do you know the kind of thing that will draw every deviant in the world towards it? No? I don't. I can't think of anything that would draw every kind of deviant in the world to it. But Ron has gone, these trails, healthy walking trails in the fresh air in nature, will actually draw people with drug problems, every kind of drug problems, or all kinds of drug problems, and every deviant in the world to it. So for me, that suggests he has a real focus on criminality. Is that projection? Because he's got a criminal past himself? I don't know. I do know, obviously, he broke his probation and wasn't above flouting the rules and so on. But yeah, his first thought, in his words, was drug problems and deviants drawn to the area there. The woman says, we walked it a little bit. I was a little scared, because it was just us two. And then he says, it's long gone. They're not going to do it again. Not here anyway. So I think he's trying to reassure the two people talking there. But he does seem to know that this is not going to happen again. I do not think that's because, hey, I'm not going to do that again. I think he's trying to be nice and reassure them. And then he's asked, do you think they're from here? And he says, I thought it was part of some type of family for a long time, which the for a long time at the end of that says he doesn't think that anymore. But it does suggest that he thought it was some type of family, which is interesting because remember when he was doing the news reports and he thought that he mentioned families walking their children along that trail, and then he said someone must have walked them down there. At that time, did he think that he was giving this? Did he think the families were involved in this? It would add up. It's very congruent in his words that potentially the families would have been involved in this. Obviously, the families were not involved in this, but is that what was Ron Logan's thought process? Is that why he mentions walking with someone down there to where the bodies were found in the news interviews, which were very shortly after the murders? But he doesn't think that anymore, but he did think at the time that it was some type of family involved there. He's asked, did you really? He says, really? He says, why did you, or he's asked, why do you think that? He says, because it's too damn close. You can't see the forest for the tree looking right at them. But the person who'd done that could have been on the search team looking for them when they went missing. Does he have someone in mind there who was on the search team? I'm interested. The fact he says could, he's not definite about it, but I'm wondering if, again, he has someone in mind that could have been on the search team there. And he then says, they had people out here in my woods that night and they were looking for them all over the place and they didn't find them. And then he says, now, why didn't they find them? So, look, he's here sharing a theory about this crime. What he's not doing is trying to divert attention away from himself or anything like that at all. He's there sharing something about his theory about the crime and kind of going, is there something dodgy about that night where the search teams were out and they didn't find the body? Was that because someone involved in this murder was part of the search team? You'll notice he doesn't put himself in the search team. It's people who were out here in the woods. He is apart from the search. He's not saying that he took part in the search at all. I don't know if he did or not, but from what I've seen of him, kind of self-interested, not really that bothered about stuff. A bit peed off that this happened in his and got him into some trouble. Then I don't think he was part of the search team. The woman says, I find that surprising too. And he says, and if that is a crime scene with hundreds of people in my woods and walking up and down the creek, tromping all over anything, what are you going to find? Something there that he is, if that is a crime scene, is that a kind of leakage that he doesn't know because it's a very natural language? If that is the crime scene, we know the bodies were found there, but there may have been other crime scenes where something actually happened. So again, from what I'm hearing in this covert recording, he's very open to theories. He's not trying to persuade anyone of his innocence, but he does come across as slightly self-centered. And also, that mention of deviance and drug problems, I think this guy is not obsessed with criminality, but criminality plays high up in his thought processes. Let's hear some more from Ron in this covert recording.
Can you walk back there or no? Can you get back to where it happened?
It's not real easy, no.
Oh.
No, it's That's why it's such an odd. Okay, this where the bodies were is about 80 feet below where we're standing, and that side over there it goes down into a big valley and a big. Deer Creek's way below us here.
Yeah.
Quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a big drop. Yeah.
Elevations. You would have to. I don't know how you get there unless you make them walk there. How you gonna get them there?
Right.
I don't know. How do you make two 14-year-old girls do something they don't want to do?
You know what? I was a teacher for 10 years. I don't know. Somebody in authority that they'd have to listen to.
This is somebody in the family.
Or family, someone they knew. Or authority. Yeah.
No, I don't know. It's pretty crazy. Now, what messed them up, what brought all the public down on them, I mean, they really crafted their white hat, is when they completely turned 180 degrees down. 2 years later, they're not looking for an old guy like me. They're looking for a young pup.
Right.
Now, wait a minute. You're going to just look at me and say, oh, sorry, Ron. Sorry, Ron, for all the shit we did and pulled on you and all the false reports we made. Send you to prison for not driving without a driver's license. Who goes to prison for that?
Feeling sorry for himself again there, Ron. Let's go through the words in that excerpt. He is asked, can you walk back there or no? Can you get back to where it happened? He says, it's not real easy, no. That's why it's such a odd... Now, he says it's not real easy. Again, we've got this knowledge that he knows how to get there. It's not real easy. Does say it can be done just with difficulty, but he does have knowledge of the trail down there. Interesting again. Look, it doesn't prove anything one way or the other, but he's not pretending that he's never been there. He's not sitting there going, I wouldn't know. I've never been there, which is something a guilty person trying to distance themselves from everything that happened may act that way. Then he says, and I think he's pointing things out. Okay, this is where the bodies were. It's about 80 feet below where we're standing. And again, he's using bodies, so again, we've got some more of this real language that is not downplaying too much what has happened. And that side over there, it goes down into a big valley and a big Deer Creek's way below us. And then the woman says, it's a big drop, yeah. And he says, you would have to. I don't know how you get here unless you make them walk here. How are you going to get them here? Now, I don't know is generally a truthful statement from people. People who are telling the truth do not mind saying, I don't know. People who are lying feel that they need to know, so will not say, I don't know, or will use a slightly deceptive phrase like no idea or so on. So he said, I don't know. Another data point for me that this guy is probably telling mostly the truth when he's doing this. And then we just have this concept again of, he says, unless you make them walk here, how are you going to get them here? Now, I can't explain this one. Maybe, if you can get involved in the comments, if you can explain why his focus, or any theories on why his focus is the only way to get there is walking there. The only thing that's gone through my mind is he a really unfit guy who drives everywhere? And it's kind of like surprising to him that someone would walk somewhere and actually do that. I don't know. But yeah, he has certainly in his head got this theory that they had to walk there to where the bodies were found. And then he says, I don't know. How do you make two 14-year-old girls do something they don't want to do? Now, got a couple of things on this. Number one, we've got this focus on the age of the children again, and the fact that we're 14-year-old girls, so where he's kind of talking about children again. But also, it's a question out loud, to which if he was the killer, he'd know the answer to. Ain't a question that we would expect someone lying and pretending to be innocent to ask. He's looking for answers to that. Now, look, first to admit, this could be someone playing a great game of pretending to be innocent and going, how do you do that? But when you add this to data point after data point after data point, this is very much how an innocent and truthful person would talk. Then we have this great line. I was a teacher for 10 years. I don't know. Somebody in authority they'd have to listen to. So it's put to him that if someone was going to make two 14-year-old girls do something they didn't want to do, it would be someone in authority. And he says, unless it was someone in the family. So we have that focus again on being in the family. And the woman goes, Family, yeah, someone they knew, or authority, yeah. So authority's put to him twice now, and he does not engage with that at all. He, I think, has still got these family thoughts there. If you keep listening, you will hear him mention more of family, and maybe this will explain why his thoughts were there. I will say again, the families were not involved in this. He says, I don't know. So there we go. We've got the I don't know again. It's pretty crazy. Now, what messed them up? What brought the building down on them? I mean, they really crafted a white hat, so they completely turned 180 degrees down, brought the building down on them. This is very interesting because I believe at this time now, Ron had come out of prison that he was in for breaking probation. But obviously no murderer had been caught yet at the time of this recording. What brought the building down on them is him showing his distaste again for law enforcement, the fact that they were trying to pin it on him or an old guy like him, and then they had to change this and do a 180 on it. And I think, again, this shows his distaste for law enforcement. He says 2 years later, they're not looking for an old guy like me, they're looking for a young fella. And then we get this feeling sorry for himself again. Now, wait a minute, you're going to just look at me and say, oh, sorry, Ron, for all the shit we did and pulled on you and all the false reports we made. Send you to prison for not driving without a driver's license. Who goes to prison for that? Ron Logan did. He's feeling sorry for himself, but you'll notice that he's feeling sorry for himself getting done for not driving without a driver's license. He isn't grateful he wasn't charged with the killings. And that's kind of standard. That's how it should be. If you haven't done the killings, if you are innocent from there, then, the big thing for him is not getting away with this. The big thing for him is actually getting done for driving without the driver's license. So, got some interesting stuff there. He's still got this focus on the families, but I'm seeing more and more data points of this is a guy sharing his thoughts, wondering how things happened around the incident that occurred on his property. Let's just get one last bit from this covert recording.
We're just two middle-aged women from Fort Wayne, Indiana.
I'm just an old man that got the hell beat out of
It sounds like it. Yeah.
18 hours in a lock.
For what, a DUI?
Yeah. Solitary confinement in a concrete cell with no bedding, no bed, no clothes, and maybe in there naked.
Oh, Ron.
No food.
Did you have an attorney?
Yeah, my attorney didn't know where the hell I was. He ain't where's the shed either. If I had a good attorney, this never would have happened to me.
Oh, my God. Bless your heart.
Never happened to me.
Did you know anybody of their families? Did you
No,
know?
I never know.
Not before?
Grandparent, one of the grandparents, because he's got a record that long. There's like 17 felonies in those two families combined. Libby's dad got 6 or 7 felonies.
Right. With meth charges?
Yeah.
And we just saw where he lived. Really close. He just lives right over there.
Does he still live?
I think so.
So now we have some more focus on the families there. It's said, we're just two middle-aged women from Fort Wayne, Indiana. They might be, but they were doing covert recordings. I don't know what was going on there. And he says, I'm just an old man that got the hell beat out of him. So we have this feeling sorry for himself again for what happened to him. She says to him, it sounds like it. For what, a DUI? He says, yeah, solitary confinement in a concrete cell with no bedding, no bed, no clothes. They made me stand there naked. Now, I'm wondering if there is a bit of old man flirtation going on here. To be fair, it might have been started by that comment of we're just two women from Fort Wayne, Indiana. And he's just, I'm an old man that got the hell beat out of him. And then he says, no bed, no clothes. They made me stand there naked. Now, naked's one of the more sexual ways of describing that. He could have said they made me stand there undressed or without a stitch on, but he went to the word naked, and I wonder if he's doing a little bit of old man flirting there, which, and she says, oh, Ron. Now, maybe she's kind of using language like that because it's like, oh, Ron, I'm very sorry for you, to entice him to say more. He goes on to say, no food. So if you look at all the things he's been deprived of, the things that are a priority to him, no bedding, no bed, no clothes. So actually, bedding and bed come first in his priority list. Again, I think maybe just a lazy person, and we can see that come through in the first thing that he mentions. No clothes. They made me stand there naked. No food. So food is lower down his needs. They then talk about the attorney, and we just get this very sorry for himself about being in prison again. If I had a good attorney, this would never have happened to me. Also, if you hadn't driven when you weren't supposed to, Ron, this would not have happened to you either. But the blame is all on everyone else, not Ron's fault. So look, as much as I'm saying I don't think Ron is hiding anything here, I don't think Ron is blameless in the way that his life turned out at all. She says, oh my God, bless your heart. This would never have happened to me. Again, Ron taking no ownership. Did you know anybody of their families? Did you know? And he says, no, I never know. And then he's says something that's unclear about the grandparents, but someone's got a record that long. Then he says there's like 17 felonies in those two families combined. So no love lost there between Ron and the families involved here. He says Libby's dad's got 6 or 7 felonies, so he's got this focus on their criminality again. It's something that Ron talks about: drug problems, he talks about deviance, he talks about probation and so on. He regularly mentions criminality. The next thing is then he's asked, does he still live over there? And he says, he asks, does he still live there? So there's no closeness with him and the families at all. He certainly hasn't been tracking their motives or anything like that, which is something that killers may sometimes do. So there we go. That's what I've got on Ron Logan. So, what are my thoughts on all of that? Well, look, I said at the very beginning I was going to be looking for storytelling. Didn't see any signs of storytelling from him at all. I said I'd be looking for persuasion. I didn't see any of that happening whatsoever in what was going on. Didn't see him trying to hide things as well. He seemed very open. He seemed to be getting everything out front and talking quite openly about things. And stress, not loads of stress, especially not stutters on words like I, which is always a big giveaway of someone with real internal stress there. He blames the murder that happened for his predicament about him being sent to prison. He takes no responsibility for what happened to him at all, though, and I don't like that. I describe him as a bit of a waster, really. But there is no signs that he's hiding guilt, not major one. That he wanted the murderer caught is the big thing for me. He focused on that, and I see that so little from anyone who's guilty of a murder pretending to be innocent of it. However, look, he does blame everyone else, including the victims of the crime, for his predicament, because it was them that got themselves murdered. So I don't think he was a great guy. Do think he's a lazy type of person. I do have issues about his focus on children. I'd have some questions about what was going on in his mind there. Also, the sexual imagery when he talked about deviance and when he talked about himself being naked. I do wonder what was going on in Ron Logan's private life that was there. And also that walking with children thing, I think can be explained away by the family things, but does he have just some knowledge of what happened? It's a possibility, but do I think it's possible Richard Allen is in jail for a crime that Ron Logan did? No, I don't. Not from the words of Ron Logan that I've seen. But hey, what do you think? Do let me know in the comments here if you can on the platform, or you can get in touch on social media. You'll find the links to social media in the show notes for this episode. Neveratruerword.com is the website. If you go there, you'll find some more stuff on the Delphi case and Richard Allen and some of the words that he's used. And there's loads more to discover there. It's neveratruerword.com, and we'll see you soon for something new from Never a Truer Word.